The 10th of April, 1965. A house in Chicago is turning into an orange roar, windows coughing smoke, neighbors shouting for anyone to get out. Linda Darnell makes it outside, stunned, the kind of beautiful Hollywood used to print. Then she turns around. Not for jewelry, not for a script, not for pride, for a child trapped inside. Within hours, the woman 20th Century Fox once sold as an untouchable screen goddess is dead at 41. And the most unsettling question isn't only how a star dies in a fire, it's why her life had been burning down long before the flames ever found her. Linda was pushed into the studio machine at 15, dressed older than her age, coached to look worldly, and praised for the parts of her that could be photographed. Headlines loved the face and distrusted the mind. Some whispered she was calculating, a girl who knew how to charm power. Others, the people who saw her between takes, remembered something softer. A young woman trying to be taken seriously in a town that treated beauty like a cage. Her rise was real. Blood and sand made her dangerous and desirable. Forever Amber made her famous and controversial enough that the same industry that profited from her image could quietly punish her for it. How do you win the spotlight and still lose your own story? And when the system moves on to younger faces, what happens to the women it trained to survive only under the lights? By the early 1950s, Darnell was fighting to stay visible. Films, television, any stage that would have her while gossip tallied her weight, her drinking, her decline. Then came Chicago, then came the fire, and in that split-second decision to run back inside, Linda Darnell became something Hollywood never knew how to market, a human being. Linda Darnell was only 15 when she signed with 20th Century Fox, but the contract did not describe a childhood. It described potential. Studio executives saw a face that could sell tickets and a figure that could be shaped into something older, more sophisticated, more profitable. Hollywood did not wait for her to grow up. It accelerated the process. Wardrobe altered her silhouette. Makeup artists deepened her gaze. Publicists adjusted her biography. The girl from Texas was carefully recast as a worldly young woman who seemed to understand desire before she was old enough to legally vote. On screen, she was paired with men far older than she was. Off-screen, she was expected to behave as if she belonged in rooms filled with producers, directors, and powerful men who had already decided what she represented. Her mother hovered over the early years of her career, fiercely protective yet deeply invested in the opportunity. Every audition, every contract detail, every publicity appearance passed through that filter. Linda's teenage years were negotiated in offices rather than classrooms. Privacy was not part of the arrangement. Neither was hesitation. The studio machine worked efficiently. She was photographed constantly. Magazine spreads emphasized her beauty more than her discipline. Reporters described her as exotic, mature, alluring. One headline famously suggested she was too beautiful to be serious. It sounded like praise. It functioned like limitation. There were whispers, of course. Some suggested she understood how to charm influential figures. Others hinted that no one advanced that quickly without learning how to navigate power. But what does that really mean when the person in question is barely old enough to understand the structure she is navigating? Was she calculating or simply adapting? Was she ambitious or aware that the window for young actresses was always painfully small? By the time she appeared in films that required sensual intensity, audiences accepted the illusion completely. Few stopped to consider the gap between the roles she played and the life she had barely begun living. Hollywood had created an image and presented it as natural. The industry often did this with young women crafting an adult mystique long before adulthood itself had fully formed. Inside the studio system, identity could be rearranged like set decoration. Contracts dictated behavior. Morality clauses policed reputation. Publicists softened scandals and sharpened fantasy. Linda's image was never accidental. It was engineered. And engineering has consequences. When a young actress becomes valuable primarily for how she looks, the unspoken rule is that her value is temporary. Beauty sells quickly. It also expires quickly. That reality lingers behind every compliment. Every camera flash carries a countdown. Did Linda understand that countdown at 15? Did she know that the same machine lifting her toward stardom could later move on without apology? Or did she believe, as many young stars do, that talent and loyalty would guarantee protection? The studio system promised security. It delivered control. It promised exposure. It delivered scrutiny. It promised fame. It rarely promised longevity. By the early 1940s, Linda Darnell was no longer just a teenager with potential. She was a finished product, glossy, desirable, and marketable. But beneath the polish was still a young woman trying to catch up with the version of herself the world had already decided was real. And once the world decides who you are, how do you ever get the chance to become something else? By the time Linda Darnell appeared in Blood and Sand, the transformation was complete. She was no longer presented as a promising young actress. She was marketed as temptation itself. The camera lingered. Publicity photographs emphasized curve, shadow, suggestion. Reviewers spoke about her magnetism long before they discussed her technique. The performance worked. Audiences responded. The industry took notes. From that point forward, Linda was frequently cast as the woman who disrupts stability, the alluring outsider, the dangerous beauty who draws men away from reason. The roles were profitable, but they narrowed her range. Once Hollywood finds a formula that sells, it repeats it. And once an actress becomes identified with desire, it becomes difficult for the audience to imagine her as anything else. Then came Forever Amber. The film was expansive, controversial, and heavily promoted. Religious organizations criticized its sensual tone. Headlines amplified the scandal. The box office numbers were strong, but the undertone shifted. Linda was no longer just beautiful. She was provocative. She was risky. The contradiction is difficult to ignore. The studio benefited from the controversy. Yet the same moral anxiety that helped sell tickets also attached itself to her reputation. She became associated with excess, indulgence, temptation qualities that were profitable on screen but suspect off it. What happens when the role begins to overwrite the person? When the public cannot distinguish between performance and identity, Linda reportedly expressed frustration that she was rarely offered roles emphasizing emotional depth over physical allure. She wanted complexity. The industry wanted consistency. Producers were cautious about repositioning a star whose image was already lucrative. Risk, in Hollywood, is carefully calculated. Reinvention is expensive. There is also the matter of perception. Beauty, especially in the 1940s, was double-edged currency. It opened doors, but it also closed certain conversations. Critics frequently reduced her performances to appearance. Too beautiful to be serious, resurfaced in different forms. The implication was subtle but clear. Her face was doing the work. Yet colleagues who worked closely with her described discipline and preparation. They noted that she studied scripts carefully and sought emotional authenticity within roles that did not always demand it. That effort rarely became headline material. Glamour photographs sold better than craft. If the system rewards surface and sideline substance, can an actress ever fully control her own narrative? And when audiences applaud the image rather than the effort, who benefits and who pays? The post-war years intensified the shift. Hollywood was adjusting to cultural changes. New stars emerged with different styles. The industry leaned into realism, grit, evolving tastes. For actresses built on mystique and stylized allure, the ground felt less stable. Linda was not alone in facing this shift, but she embodied its tension. She had been engineered for a specific era's fantasy. When that fantasy evolved, she was expected to evolve with it without ever abandoning the brand that made her valuable. The trap was elegant and nearly invisible. Success secured her status. Success also confined it. Audiences saw a luminous figure commanding the screen. They saw confidence, seduction, danger. But behind the lighting and costume, there was a question quietly forming. If the world only loves the image, what happens when the image changes? And more unsettling still, did Linda Darnell ever truly get the chance to be anything other than what Hollywood first decided she should be? Fame does not silence loneliness. It amplifies it. By the mid-1940s, Linda Darnell could not enter a room unnoticed. The camera adored her. The tabloids dissected her. Applause followed her image, but rarely her inner life. The woman and the projection were beginning to separate, and the distance between them grew quietly, almost invisibly. She married Peveril Marley while still young. On paper, it appeared stable, shared profession, shared circles, shared understanding of Hollywood's machinery, but proximity to the industry did not protect the marriage from its pressures. Long shoots, constant scrutiny, and unspoken expectations eroded intimacy. The relationship fractured. The divorce made headlines. And once headlines begin, they rarely end gently. The press did not simply report the separation, it shaped a narrative. Words like ambition, calculation, and temperament began to orbit her name. It was easier to assume motive than to explore vulnerability. A beautiful actress in control of her image unsettled certain observers. If she advanced, some suggested it must have been through charm rather than craft. The stereotype was convenient, yet colleagues remembered something different. Crew members described her as disciplined and often reserved between takes. A co-worker once remarked that she seemed more guarded than manipulative, more careful than cold. Friends later suggested that beneath the polish was a woman who feared irrelevance more than scandal. They insisted she wanted to be valued, not merely admired. After Marley, Linda married again, this time to a wealthy pilot whose world existed beyond studio gates. To the public, it looked like escape distance from gossip columns and casting politics, but geography does not dissolve expectation. Even outside Hollywood, she remained Linda Darnell, the image that preceded her. The second marriage did not deliver permanence. It delivered another chapter of speculation. Rumors continued to circulate. Some were exaggerated, others unverifiable. In Hollywood, repetition can solidify into truth. A whisper becomes identity. A suggestion becomes character description. And once the narrative fixes, it is remarkably difficult to loosen. What does it do to a person when strangers feel entitled to interpret her morality? When private choices are filtered through public fantasy? When affection appears conditional on beauty, success, and compliance? Female stars of the era lived inside a narrow corridor of acceptability. They were expected to be desirable but respectable, independent but non-threatening, confident but never demanding. Deviation in any direction risked backlash. Linda moved carefully within that corridor, but the walls were invisible and constantly shifting. Her beauty functioned as both passport and prison. It opened doors to opportunity while simultaneously defining the limits of sympathy extended to her. If she struggled, it was framed as vanity. If she succeeded, it was attributed to seduction. Complexity was inconvenient. Did she begin to internalize those distortions? Did the constant evaluation reshape her own perception? Or did she hold on to a quieter version of herself that the public never encountered a woman separate from lighting, camera angles, and rumor? Observers in later years described signs of insecurity beneath her composure. There were fears about aging, about diminishing relevance, about whether love directed at her was truly for her or merely for the persona she embodied. That anxiety intensified as roles shifted and attention thinned. The more visible she became, the less seen she may have felt. And perhaps that is the most haunting paradox of her life. Photographed endlessly, discussed relentlessly, desired publicly yet privately confined within an invisible cage built from expectation. When admiration is directed toward an illusion, who protects the human being beneath it? And how long can anyone survive when love depends on remaining the same forever? Hollywood rarely announces when it is done with someone. It simply looks away. By the early 1950s, the studio system that had engineered Linda Darnell's rise was shifting. Contracts loosened, power structures changed. A new generation of faces entered the frame. The industry's appetite evolved, and with it, its definition of relevance. Linda did not disappear overnight. That is not how decline works. Instead, the scale narrowed. Leading roles became supporting ones. Prestige productions gave way to smaller projects. The budgets shrank, the lighting softened, the posters no longer centered her name. She tried to adapt. She accepted films that would keep her visible. She turned toward television and stage work, seeking spaces where performance could matter more than glamour. The effort was real. The results were uneven. Reinvention requires opportunity as much as willingness, and opportunity is not evenly distributed. Meanwhile, the commentary shifted. Magazines that once praised her allure began to reference weight, age, fatigue. The tone changed from celebration to measurement. Hollywood has long allowed male stars to age into authority, into gravitas, into character. For women, aging often arrives as quiet replacement. Youth is renewable. Nostalgia is not. What happens to a woman whose currency was defined by youth when the market pivots? When the camera angles adjust towards someone newer, someone fresher, someone untouched by yesterday's headlines, there were also whispers of increased drinking. Whether exaggerated or accurate, the narrative attached easily. When a star's visibility fades, personal habits become explanation. It is simpler to attribute decline to weakness than to structural shift. But consider the architecture around her. Linda had entered the industry at 15. She had been shaped, promoted, framed. Her value was calculated in close-ups and publicity spreads. Very little of her adult life existed outside the machinery of performance. When the machinery slowed, what foundation remained? Observers from that period described a woman still proud, still aware of her abilities, but increasingly aware of time. Not old, not finished, just no longer positioned at the center. The psychological transition from spotlight to sidelight can be jarring. Applause has volume. Silence has weight. Did she feel abandoned? Or did she recognize the pattern, having watched it happen to others before her? Hollywood cycles through phases with remarkable efficiency. Admiration is intense but often temporary. There is also the matter of preparation. Young stars are taught how to pose, how to speak, how to perform. They are rarely taught how to exit. No manual explains how to transform from icon to memory without losing oneself in the process. Linda's attempts to remain present were not failures of effort. They were confrontations with an industry recalibrating its ideals. The mystique that once made her luminous now felt tethered to an earlier moment. Reinvention requires narrative control, and narrative control was never fully hers. If the system builds a career around a specific image, can that career survive once the image shifts? And when the industry moves on without ceremony, how does the person left behind redefine worth? By the early 1960s, Linda Darnell was no longer a central fixture of Hollywood glamour. She was a familiar name navigating a quieter landscape. The cage had not vanished. It had simply grown larger and less visible. The lights had not gone out completely. They had just moved elsewhere. The 10th of April 1965 did not begin as tragedy. It began as an ordinary evening in Chicago, far removed from studio lots, camera rigs, and carefully controlled lighting. Linda Darnell was visiting friends in a quiet domestic setting, a world that felt smaller and more human than the vast machinery of Hollywood that had once defined her. Then the fire started. Flames spread quickly through the house, smoke thickening the air, panic replacing conversation. In the chaos, Linda made it outside. She had escaped. For a brief moment, survival had already chosen her. But then came the realization that a child was still inside. Accounts vary in minor details, yet they converge on the essential truth. Linda turned back. She re-entered the burning house not as a former star, not as an image crafted by publicity departments, but as a person responding to instinct. There was no calculation in that decision. No performance, no audience, only urgency. She was pulled from the flames with severe burns covering much of her body. The injuries were catastrophic, and within hours, at the age of 41, Linda Darnell was dead. The headlines carried shock and sorrow, but they also carried something else, an undercurrent of symbolism that reporters could not resist. For years, she had been described in terms of heat and light. She was smoldering, radiant, dangerous, luminous. The language used to frame her career was combustible long before the fire itself. A woman so often defined by flame had now died in one. To some, it felt like cruel irony. To others, it felt like inevitability shaped into metaphor. Yet that interpretation risks flattening the truth. The fire did not define her. What defined her was the choice she made in its presence. She had already reached safety. She did not need to go back. The instinct to protect overrode fear, image, and history. In that moment, she was not the product of a studio system, not the subject of gossip columns, not the embodiment of beauty under scrutiny. She was simply human, and still, the industry moved forward. After the initial wave of coverage, premieres resumed, new faces appeared on marquees, and the machinery continued its relentless rotation. Hollywood had once presented her as untouchable, almost mythic, yet myth offers no immunity against mortality. The same system that had amplified her image had never promised permanence. Long before Chicago, the spotlight had shifted. Long before the fire, the slow burn of expectation, replacement, and reinvention had already left its mark. Did she sense that shift in her final years? Did she feel the narrowing of roles, the thinning of attention, the subtle recalibration of relevance? Or did she still believe there would be another chapter, another opportunity to redefine herself beyond the confines of youth and glamour? The fire did not create her tragedy. It completed a narrative that had been forming for years. Linda Darnell entered Hollywood as a teenager, molded into fantasy, and left the world as a woman who acted without hesitation when it mattered most. Between those 2 points stretched a life shaped by beauty, ambition, control, scrutiny, and longing. In the end, the flames separated the image from the person once and for all. What remained was not a symbol, not an irony, not a headline. What remained was the undeniable truth that behind every constructed star stands a fragile human being capable of courage, capable of fear, and capable of choices that no studio ever scripted. Linda Darnell's story does not collapse into a single tragedy. It stretches across construction, confinement, scrutiny, decline, and finally, fire. She entered Hollywood as a teenager reshaped into fantasy, taught how to hold a gaze, how to turn toward light, how to embody desire. The system elevated her quickly, polished her relentlessly, and sold her image with confidence. But elevation is not protection. The same machinery that magnified her beauty never guaranteed her permanence. Her career was real. Her talent was real, yet the narrative surrounding her often reduced both to surface. When youth defined value, time became adversary. When beauty defined identity, change became threat. As Hollywood recalibrated, she recalibrated with it, trying to remain visible in an industry that rarely teaches its stars how to transition with dignity. The slow shift from center frame to background is rarely announced. It is felt. And then came Chicago. In her final act, stripped of spotlight and spectacle, she acted without hesitation. No audience applauded. No camera framed the moment. The choice belonged entirely to her. In that instant, Linda Darnell stepped outside the image that had both sustained and confined her. She was not a myth, not a cautionary tale, not a symbol of irony. She was human. Perhaps that is the truth Hollywood struggles with most. It knows how to manufacture radiance. It does not always know how to sustain the people who carry it. Some stars fade quietly, some are replaced without ceremony, and some burn so brightly that the line between brilliance and destruction becomes almost invisible. Linda Darnell was never only the flame. She was the woman inside it.